Okay, so in regards to transracial, which transracial is basically identifying as another race, right? So there is a big, I want to say, kind of kept in the family secret within the Latin community is that there's a lot of racism, in-house racism, and self-hate within the Latin community. It's also in the Black community as well, but specifically in the Latin community, and I'm addressing this. So, Hispanics aren't a race. They are ethnicities. They're varying ethnicities, just like there are varying ethnicities of Africans, African descendants, which would actually include uh, Hispanics. Now, some Hispanics recognize that they have African blood in them. Some Hispanics can't deny it. They probably look more black than what you would assume a Latino person should look like. And then you have Latinos who look white, or just have really, really light skin, And as I've mentioned earlier, like some of my cousins, I have three of my cousins. I have a couple of Puerto Rican cousins, but I'm gonna mention three. The three of them are sisters. One is like a really, really, light skinned Puerto Rican. She would pass as, the whiter type of Puerto Rican. The other is middle, kind of like brownish, Puerto Rican or whatever. Um, you know, yeah, like brownish Puerto Rican or whatever. Sort of like actress Lauren Velez, and her twin, along those lines. And then you have the other sister who's just black, you know, and even in in some of the other families and stuff like that, or in our family, but in some of the other areas of the Latinos and stuff like that, skin color varies or whatever. But in a Latin community, there is an instilled racism within them. Now, there are those Latinos who refuse to identify with Africans, their African heritage, or anything like that at all, and strictly identify with their Spaniard slash white heritage, right? So within their families, there may be individuals whom, well, one, they encourage, to within families to not marry darker skinned people, don't marry black people, don't marry black Latinos, marry the more whiter Latinos, and again, this has been instilled in them, even back from the colonial days, slavery days, during the whiting process. Anybody who's really familiar with, Latinos history, is familiar with the whiting process. If you don't, I'll try to cover it briefly, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, even though they encourage, hey, marry, the more whiter, looking Latinos or even white people in general, that African blood is in you, is not something that you can avoid. Not only is the African blood in you, but the Taino blood is in you, and at the end of the day, your origins are from colored people. Your origins are from colored people. You can't, have Latino pride and not have some kind of pride in the colorful background of who you are. Even if you don't identify with the African part of you, the Taino part of you is a major part of who you are, so on and so forth. So to those Latinos who self-hate, who hate the African side of them or whatever, is in you. The Taino side is in you. You are not full Spaniard. Now, to before I go on, there is nothing wrong with accepting that. You can have two white Latinos come together and produce a fully black baby. You can have two black Latinos come together and produce a fully white baby. It's in the blood. And there are a lot of Latinos out there who know exactly what I'm talking about. All right, so now with that said, for those of you who aren't familiar with the whiting process, so the whiting process was originally Latinos were American Indians. And in regards to when I mean American Indians, if you know anything about America, the U.S. is not just America. You got, the whole continent of America. You got Canada, which is technically America. You got the U.S., which is America. You got Central and South America, Mexico and all that stuff. So you already had natives who were here. Christopher Columbus and all them cats, they didn't discover this place. There were people already here. There were people of color. I'm not saying that they were black or African. There is some evidence out there that kind of points in that direction. But whatever the case is, they were people of color. And, your color tends to change anyway, depending on, which environment you're in. So you had a lot of them moving through the islands, the Caribbean islands, So you had Taino Indians, Arawak Indians, all these guys down there in the islands. Now, when the Spaniards came and pretty much took over, there's a lot of history, and this is the stuff that needs to be. This goes towards the education. This is why it's important to know your history. It's important to know about racism, classism, history, so on and so forth, because these things have been excluded from general education. And to go back to the white nationalist comment that I made earlier on, history, if you pretty much read American history, U.S. history, it pretty much covers more so predominantly the Caucasian portion of the history, even though black history is a huge part of what the United States is today. American Indian history or American Native is a huge part of, the history, and even the individuals who make up this wonderful country. So education is affected by these things. Like I said, it's all relative, how the system is designed. But going back to it, during the whiting process, you had your Taino Indians, you had the Spaniards who came over. Spaniards, kind of linked up or whatever, supposedly he was trying to make a peace treaty with, the Taino Indians, and then things went south, and there's different stories here and there. Through war and through sicknesses, a majority of the male Taino Indians died. A lot of them were enslaved. A lot of them got sick and died or whatever. A lot of them were killed in battle. They were used in the workforce. African slaves were brought over. African slaves were, also put into the workforce. Africans and Tainos kind of mixed. And then the Spaniard men, the white men who came over, also started mixing. Same, thing as in black history. A lot of our women have been raped, which goes back to that comment that I made earlier, that there are a lot of black people out here with Caucasian DNA in them. There are a lot of Caucasians out here with African DNA in them. And then not only that, but it also goes to the comment of some of the African people who were able to pull off being white and who married into white families and had white children and so on and so forth. And some of those people never knew that their ancestor was African because they pulled off being white and lived as a white person. There's a lot of this stuff in history that should be taught, But anyway, just like, black women were raped or, married into white families and stuff like that. These Tainos, African Tainos and even Africans in some cases, were married or sex slaves of a lot of these Caucasians, and especially with the Taino men not really dying, with them not really existing anymore or dying off in the masses and so on and so forth. Tainos, you know, uh, you know, reproduce with other slaves, Africans, and then also either forcefully or willingly reproduced with uh, their Spaniard captors. Now, and the thing is that the Spaniard captors treated the lighter people a certain kind of way. So, what happens when you're a slave and you're being treated horribly, and your children are being treated horribly? You encourage them to marry into or, you know, uh, produce lighter babies so that your future is better, or their future is better. And there's more to it than this, but I'm just breaking it down real quickly, and then that became a thing, get away from the Africans, they're treated horribly, you know, uh, you know, let's kind of stick more towards, the lighter skinned people, so on and so forth, and then that's still, all of that was instilled in them is still, within the Latin community today. And it's kind of foolish, even if you look at, Dominican Republic and Haiti, if you know their history, you'll know that they're all, pretty much the same people, but they are the perfect example of, that history. You'll see, you go over here, you got black Dominicans, you got, white Dominicans, whatever, and then you got blacks over here whom have Taino heritage as well, in their bloodline, but they're African, or Haitian now, and then even throughout the rest of the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, parts of Cuba. Cuba actually is a pretty good example of this as well, where you have those who strictly identify as Spaniard and Taino, and they're more of the whiter Cubans, and I forget, there's a certain name for that. I forget what it's called, and they take pride in that they're not really affiliated with the those who have African, bloodline or African features, so on and so forth. So there's a major racial issue within the Latino community. Now, like I said a couple minutes ago, two white Latinos can have a black baby. Two black Latinos can have a white baby. It's in your bloodline. You shouldn't hate. You shouldn't self-hate. You shouldn't encourage. Only marry into a whiter family, or this and that. With that said, there are those who do it. There are those Latinos who can pass as white, and I've met a couple of them. And I mean, looking at them, you really couldn't tell. But they can pass as white, and often marry into white families, which again, there's nothing wrong with interracial dating. You fall in love with who you fall in love with. Now, if you're doing it out of spite of, your bloodline or whatever, continuing the whiting process, that's messed up. If you're doing it because that's who you legitimately fell in love with, hey, it is what it is. But yeah, when you have, let's say a predominantly, white Latino family, and this baby is born a little bit darker, or this baby is born with more curlier, frizzier hair, gearing more toward their African side, or they're picking up African features, and then that family member gets treated, a certain kind of way, discrimination, they get discriminated against within their own family because of features that they were born with, that's messed up, and it's important, not just, against blacks and whites, but even with Latinos, to, we gotta attack this racism thing, we gotta attack this racism thing. That's your blood, you shouldn't treat your child, your grandchild, your niece, nephew, cousin, whatever, differently because they were born with different features. You could literally have, a black Latino born with, let's say, green or blue eyes or something like that, and then or gray eyes even, and have a white Latino born with brown eyes or whatever, and you hate on each other because of different features. It's crazy. The black Latino can have, kind of straightish, wavy hair. Excuse me. The white Latino can have curly, hair as if he was black. you know. But that's how big of a problem racism is, even in the families and stuff like that, is an issue. Discrimination, prejudice. And then with those individuals who do identify, as if they're white, they tend to pick up a lot of the prejudices and races, or excuse me, white supremacist mindset that the whites who they identify with have. And again, this isn't all whites. This refers to white supremacists, white nationalists, and then, ignorant people who just don't know no better. People who are prejudiced, who do discriminate, but they aren't racist. You will find in interracial couples that there are those individuals whom they will marry, a certain race. They will have babies with a certain race. They will love children, who is black, but they still have prejudices towards other individuals. They cool with, black people, friends, family, whatever, Asian people, whatever, but those prejudices are there. You know what I mean? So there's a difference between, prejudice and racism, and a lot of people don't understand that. So, yeah, to come out here and kind of hate on another group whom you may be hating on a distant relative, it's crazy, and it's that kind of ignorance that is learned, that is instilled, that is taught, and it continues in, in this type of system that we have. Now, to cover the issue with that question that buddy of mine asked, there are Latinos here in the U.S. who have displayed similar prejudices to what he has displayed towards the Latinos who are trying to come into the U.S. And he asked me, what did I think about that? Well, I just explained, that there is there is racism in the Latino community, and I've explained it earlier, like there are Latinos who aren't Mexican, or Venezuelan or Honduran or whatever, who look at those particular Latinos in a certain way, like, oh, they're dirty or they're nasty or whatever. There are Latinos who think like that, just like, there are blacks who think like that, that, if you're in a Caribbean island and you're Jamaican, you're all that or whatever, but if you come from like Haiti or whatever, you're at the bottom of this. Or if you come from, St. Croix, St. Lucia, whatever, they tend to look at each other in similar ways that Latinos look at each other, and it's not in everybody's situation, but it is relevant. So their opinions, not saying that it doesn't have any worth, but it could be backed by prejudices. There are people who get here, they get on the inside, and then, refuse to pretty much identify with, who they were, or, whatever. Hey, I'm doing better. You should do it the same way I did. Well, there's Caucasian people who say the same thing about black people. Hey, we were able to progress. We were able to, come up in life. You should be able to do the same thing. My circumstances aren't the same as yours. Their circumstances aren't the same as the Latinos whom you were talking with, So that addresses that. Now, classism. Money talks. Money talks, and money talks volumes. Okay. Racism is a big part of the way that the system is designed, but money is also. Money is behind a lot of the laws that are passed. The people who get into the political, into politics and stuff like that, one, they have to be backed by money. Okay. The people who have the money aren't necessarily looking out for the best interests of the people who don't have the money, and even what I'm displaying is a form of classism, because granted, I'm not saying that people with money are bad people. I'm not saying that at all. Even though greed does tend to follow money and corruption does tend to follow money, that doesn't mean that everybody who has money is greedy or everybody who has money is corrupt. There are millionaires out here there are millionaires out here who do wonderful things. They give back to the community. They, buy houses for less fortunate. They pay people's medical bills. Um, you know, they donate to schools. Some of these millionaires have built schools, had schools built and stuff like that, you know. And as we all know, $1 million isn't, much money these days. And I'm not necessarily referring to those millionaires. However, there are millionaires out here who will blow. There are millionaires out here who will blow, millions of dollars on cars, on yachts, on alcohol, $30,000 bottles of this and that, crazy vacations, but can't offer $5, to a homeless person, or buy them a burger off the dollar menu at Burger King or McDonald's. So and then you have those, top 1%ers, and, those are, more so the people whom I identify with, or who I identify. Yeah, I apologize for the background noise, but, you know, there's a lot of those individuals, in major corporations that are behind a lot of the laws that are being passed, how certain policies are being made, why our medication, which is the same medication as that which is in Canada, is ridiculously more expensive. Then when people want to go to Canada to get medication, you want to make it illegal, so that those people can't come back with that medication, so that way you can kind of dominate the market and stuff like that. That is attacking a particular class, healthcare, just trying to take care of yourself, your well-being and stuff like that. It shouldn't be to the point where you can just keep raising the prices and stuff like that. Matter of fact, there are medical procedures. That are outdated, where the prices are still increasing, or the prices remain ridiculously high, even though there have been breakthroughs that are less expensive. Breakthroughs in medicine and stuff that are less expensive for treating, certain issues or whatever. Obviously, the wealthy can afford this stuff, and I'm pretty sure they get the best medical treatment, you know. But even in our healthcare system, classism plays a role. In our education system, I guarantee you, all of those senators and all of those congressmen and women and the president of the United States and all of those Supreme Court justices, their children and their grandchildren are getting top-notch education, But what about our children, the children of the people who vote for them? The education system is failing a lot of these children. And I mean, the crazy part is that the curriculum that is being taught is significantly easier than what it was when many of us were growing up, and it's still failing these children, So classism is a big role. You have a lot of us, in urban areas, you live in, ghettos, hoods, whatever you want to call them. And, even though you go to work, you're paying your taxes, they're, fining you for everything from your grass not being cut to your car was parked a certain kind of way, and, whatever. You're paying tolls to cross all these different bridges and stuff like that. And then you look around and, you still live in a crappy neighborhood, maybe. That doesn't apply to everybody. And then you go over there, and, the areas are maintained, the city invests money, in different areas. Like I was watching here in Tampa, where they built this kind of pool thing down in Ybor City. And there was some issues about that some years back because it took them like a long time to finish it, whatever. But, classism plays a big role, that money isn't being invested into improving a lot of the areas that need investment. It's improving areas where they make money so they can continue to make money. So money speaks volumes, and that can affect people of all different kinds of races, ethnicities, so on and so forth. And then finally, what I want to cover is the race card. So you have a lot of. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me back it up before I cover the race card. I got one more thing I want to address. Where is it? All right, so here's one definition of a bigot: a person who is obstinately or intolerantly devoted to his or her own opinions and prejudices, especially one who regards or treats the members of a group, such as racial or ethnic groups, with hatred or intolerance. Right? So you got some people who are just stuck in their ways, and this is why education and talking and opening up about racism is so important. You have people who are just straight up ignorant. They have their views, they have their prejudices based off of no evidence whatsoever, and they identify with similar people who have people who have similar views or whatever, which reinforces that belief. And then when they start, when somebody is genuinely and legitimately expressing that, there is an act of racism taking place, or there are cases where prejudices are being displayed, and it is mistaken for racism, but is only mistaken for racism because prejudice is a part of racism. It can be separate from racism, but it is also a part of racism. So that's understandable that somebody may mistake in that. But you have bigots who are stuck in their mindset and are quick to say, "Oh, you're pulling a race card. You're pulling a race card." It's true that there are individuals who take advantage of that or whatever, and will play it, so to speak, to their advantage. However, they are such a minority that they're almost not even worth mentioning. I will mention it because they need to be addressed, and that needs to stop. But and you know who you are when you're just taking advantage of it. But in general, the majority of complaints against racism or prejudice or discrimination is legit. And when people throw up their race card, the comment, "Oh, they're just throwing up the race card." Not when people throw up their, when people make that comment, "Oh, they're just throwing the race card. Oh, y'all love to play the race card." What we're hearing, people who experience racism, people who experience discrimination, people who, whatever. What we're hearing is, "I don't want to hear that crap." "Oh, you stay like to call racist. All right, yeah, he called you an N-word. It was a slip of the tongue." "Oh, y'all call each other niggas all the time. What does it matter if he called you a nigger?" "Oh, you just throwing a race card." No, I'm making an argument that I just experienced some kind of racism, some kind of prejudice or whatever. You are displaying further characteristics of racism by demeaning me and saying that my claims of me being mistreated aren't valid because of who I am. My claims aren't valid because I'm a person of color and I've been discriminated against, and I'm putting that out there. And you're telling me that you're better, you're better than me, that you don't have to hear, my problems or hear the fact that this is going on. So those kind of individuals, or the people whom they could potentially reach, they really need to be involved in some of these conversations or whatever. Because if they can't open up their mindset, those who can open up their mindset to learn will learn a lot from them when they open their mouths and say a whole lot of stuff that just isn't accurate. So that's why talking about race, talking about racism, discrimination, prejudices, all of this stuff is important. It is so ingrained in our system and in who many of us are. And, the way that policies and laws are being made and stuff like that, we can't change the system without talking about racism, without talking about race, without talking about discrimination, all of that stuff. So white people, Asian people, Latino people, Native American people, black people, it's okay to talk about race and racism. Just don't think you better than somebody. Open up your mind and learn a little bit. And, you will see me touch on it a lot because it is relative to politics and, things that are going on. So hopefully, this 3-part series wasn't too long. Hopefully you can take it into consideration and learn something from it. Thank you for your time.